All right, folks, welcome back to another conference preview series here discussing every single college basketball conference in the country as we get closer and closer to the college basketball season. Today, we are talking about the artist formerly known as the Colonial Athletic Association. For those who missed this story, the big storyline in the CAA this year is that they are no longer the Colonial Athletic Association. They have changed their name to the Coastal Athletic Association. Smart of them to keep that CAA. That is what they're going to continue to go by. That is what they are going to continue to have as their logo, the CAA logo. So nothing changes all that much other than the full name switching from Colonial to Coastal. There's a good article about it, basically discussing the name change reflecting their recent expansion. They feel that because the conference started in 1979, I think the only team that is still left from the original iteration of the Colonial Athletic Association is William and Mary. So everything has changed. Most of the teams are different than what it was at the beginning, and they felt like changing the name to Coastal Athletic Association more accurately represents the schools that are in the conference, a conference that spans from Massachusetts all the way down to South Carolina, where most of the schools are located on the coast. So it makes more sense to have that be the team name. And that includes a new team coming over from the Big South in Campbell. The Camels of Campbell are coming into the Coastal Athletic Association for the 23-24 season. Campbell went 16-18 last year. They finished 8-10 in the Big South. Ken Pom had them 226th overall last year. That would have been 6th for the record in the CAA, 6 out of the 13 teams that were there last year. So if Campbell can continue to produce at a similar level, there's a decent chance that they will finish in the middle of the pack right away in their first year in the CAA. We often see teams tend to struggle a little bit more their first year in a new conference, and that makes sense. They are having to prepare for all new conference opponents where the other teams are only having to prepare for one new team. There's different officiating styles, various different things that come into playing in a different conference, different travel schedules, all sorts of things. So wouldn't expect Campbell to necessarily be a top 5, top 8 team right away in the CAA, but a program that has had at least a decent amount of success. Not a lot of tournament success. Most of the teams in these conferences haven't done that. This is the last time that Campbell made the NCAA tournament was 1992. So maybe not going to be challenging right at the top of the conference anytime soon, but wouldn't be surprised to see this team move into the middle of the pack in the next couple of years. Speaking of lack of tournament success, that's kind of a big storyline in the CAA. Everybody's talked about Charleston. There's a lot of really good teams in this conference, but there hasn't been a single team that has advanced in the NCAA tournament since 2012. It has been over a decade since a team in the CAA won a game in the NCAA tournament. Charleston, of course, 30-win team last year, popular, trendy pick to be a 12-5 upset last year, and they only lost by 6 in their first round game. And the team they played, 5-seeded San Diego State. They lost by 6 to the team that went to the national championship game. That is a really darn good season for Charleston last year. But again, that streak has continued of not winning games in the NCAA tournament. The question now becomes, can Charleston do it this year? Or is Charleston even going to be the team that wins that automatic bid out of the CAA? UNC-Wilmington looks very good. Hofstra went 16-2 last year. We're going to talk more about some of those teams who might win this conference, who might be challenging for an NCAA tournament bid to close out the show. But wanted to highlight the fact that it has been a long time since a team in this conference has won that automatic bid and actually turned it into a win in the big dance. As we typically do here when we talk about biggest storylines for these conferences, we're going to take a look at the coaching changes. Just one new coach coming into the CAA this year. That's at North Carolina A&T. They're replacing Philip Schumpert with Monty Ross. Schumpert was an interim head coach last year, went 13-19 in his lone season as the head coach of the Aggies. They're going to go ahead and bring in Monty Ross. Monty Ross has been in college basketball pretty much consistently since 1993. He's been assistant coach at a ton of different places, took over as the head coach at Delaware back in 2006, and was the head man there for 10 years, led Delaware to an NCAA tournament appearance in 2014. Overall, though, just went 132 and 184, while with the Blue Hens, just under 42% of his games won. Ended up getting canned in 2016, took over as an assistant coach at Temple in 2019, and has spent the last couple of years at Temple before now getting a chance to come back into the CAA and take over as the head coach at North Carolina A&T. As we also do here, a lot of the time discussing these small major, these low major conferences, one of the big storylines, unfortunately, as it tends to be in the transfer portal era, is the amount of talent out the door. And it's a big, big story in the CAA because not only do they lose a bunch of players to the transfer portal, most of them ended up at Power 5 schools, or at least a lot of the key ones ended up at Power 5, Power 6 programs, which is certainly notable in terms of how the rest of the college basketball world viewed the talent level that was in the CAA this past season. 3 first-teamers have entered the transfer portal and gone on to Power 6 programs. That includes Conference Player of the Year Aaron Estrada, who moves from Hofstra to Alabama. He was a 2-time CAA Player of the Year, began his career at Oregon, went to Hofstra, won that award twice, and now he's going to Alabama. Going to be really interesting to see how he adjusts to playing for Nate Oates' offense in the SEC. You also have fellow first-teamer Jameer Nelson going from Delaware to TCU. Jameer Nelson, of course, the son of Jameer Nelson, the longtime NBA point guard. And so we'll see how Nelson does adjusting going over to TCU and joining that program. And then you also have another first-teamer, Nick Timberlake, going from Towson to Kansas. Timberlake is expected to be the starting 3 for Kansas, going to be a floor spacer, stretch 4 guy for Hunter Dickinson and Bill Self's offense over with the Jayhawks. And then you have second-teamer Cam Woods going from North Carolina A&T to NC State, and third-teamer Jameel Telfort going from Northeastern to Butler. Again, 5 guys who are first, second, or third-teamers in the CAA. Every single one of them ends up at a Power 6 program. Once again, telling you that the level of talent, at least at the top end of the CAA, is pretty well perceived by others in the industry. We will see how these players do making that leap from this conference over to those Power 6 conferences. But Bill Self doesn't bring guys in who he doesn't think are really going to be able to help. Same with Nate Oates, same with Jamie Dixon. I think there's a real chance that these guys are going to contribute right away and kind of help prove that the level of play at this conference is as solid as many have believed watching them for the last couple of years. And closing it out here, talking about some guys coming the other direction, players who are coming from higher level programs and transferring over to the CAA. A few guys I want to highlight. We'll talk about a few more guys later as we start looking at our favorites and dark horse teams. But KJ Jenkins comes from New Mexico to UNC-Wilmington. Caleb Dorsey comes from Penn State to William and Mary. Niels Lane comes from Florida to Delaware. And Tristan Maxwell going from Georgia Tech to Hampton. Well, like we said, Charleston, first ever 30-win season last year. Can they do it again? Or will somebody like UNC-Wilmington or even a dark horse candidate take the throne, earn that automatic bid in the CAA, and potentially break the decade-long streak of not winning a game in the Big Dance? We'll talk all about that after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there is no better time than right now to get in on the action. The app is super easy to use. You can bet on all sorts of stuff like spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, folks, closing out the show today, continuing our conversation about the Coastal Athletic Association, the new named CAA, as we get into closer and closer to the college basketball season. First off, I want to thank all of you who have made Locked On College Basketball your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out those of you checking out the show on YouTube as well. We're going to continue our conversation about the CAA, starting with the favorites to win this conference this upcoming season. And we got to start with Charleston. because Charleston won 31 games last year. They went 31-4. They went 16-2 in league. They lost 2 games back-to-back by 5 combined points. That was it. That was it. Otherwise, they would have run the table in the CAA. And this is a team that definitely had to make some changes this offseason. They lose Dallin Bolin, who averaged 12-4 for them last year. They also lose a pair of double-digit scorers in Ryan Larson and Pat Robinson. Robinson was the 6th man of the year in the conference last year, but they do keep some key players as well. Again, a lot of teams at the lower major level like this who have a tremendous season like they did, you're going to see 5, 6, 8 guys enter the transfer portal. For them to lose 3 key pieces, but still maintain 3 key players as well, is pretty good in the modern era. That's pretty solid for them. They keep Rain Smith. He averaged about 11 points per game last year. They keep Ante Zovic, who averaged 11.5 points and 6 boards. They keep Ben Burnham, who averaged 9 points, 3.7 boards, and also was a sharp shooter, 44% from deep last year. Beyond that, they also bring in some pretty premier talent. Again, a program with that kind of pedigree is going to get some names in the transfer portal. The name they landed is CJ Fulton from Lafayette. Fulton averaged 10.4 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists last year at Lafayette. 10, 5, and 5 while shooting just under 39% from deep. Always good to get a point guard in who's got that kind of experience, who stuffs the stat sheet that way, who spaces the floor the way that Fulton is capable of. They also add an in-conference transfer from Stony Brook in Frankie Policelli, Policelli averaged just under 14 points, 9.5 boards per game last year. He's a grad transfer, lots of experience in the CAA. He also was a 37% shooter from deep. So they get guys coming in who have experience, guys coming in who have produced at previous schools, and guys coming in who can shoot the rock. They're going to space the floor really well. This is a tough team to beat. Pat Kelsey, of course, a fantastic coach. I think there's a lot of optimism that Charleston, maybe they don't go 31-4. It's pretty darn hard to replicate that, but there are some teams that are going to contend with them, and we'll talk about them. But at the end of the day, this is not going to be an easy team to get out at any point during the conference season. Do want to talk about UNC-Wilmington, though. I think they are the most likely team to really challenge Charleston at the top of the conference. They went 24-10 last year. They went 12-6, which was tied for 3rd in the conference last year. They lose Amari Kelly and Jamari Thomas, 2 guys who averaged about 7 points per game last year, but they returned 4 of their 5 starters. They returned leading scorer, Trezarian White, who averaged about 14 points per game last year. They also had a pair of productive transfers in Ahmad Harvey, who averaged 4.3 points and 7 rebounds at High Point. He's going to kind of anchor them down low on the block. They also had KJ Jenkins, who we mentioned earlier, guy who averaged 7.5 points per game at a very solid New Mexico squad in the defensive-focused Mountain West Conference. That's some good stuff to bring in. They're a very good defensive team. They keep their starting point guard, Shaquem Phillips, who was one of the best defensive players in the conference last year. Takayo Siddle's been very successful as the head coach at Wilmington. This team has a lot of continuity. They added some key pieces around the edges. They didn't lose a ton. I think it's hard to ignore this team as a potential real threat to Charleston at the top of the conference standings. And then the last team I want to mention before we get to the dark horse is Hofstra. Hofstra went 16-2 last year. Speedy Claxton was the coach of the year. You can't just ignore a team that went 16-2 in conference play, but they lose Aaron Estrada, 2-time CAA player of the year, averaged over 20 points per game last year. They also lost Warren Williams, who was a key piece for them. They do still have Tyler Thomas. Tyler Thomas is a graduate student who averaged 16.5 points per game last year. He's going to take on a bigger role, real chance that he's going to be that player of the year. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but to keep a 16 point per game scorer for a team that went 16-2 last year, yes, you lose Aaron Estrada, but there's still a lot of talent on this Hofstra team, and I wouldn't count the pride out in any capacity. Let's talk dark horse, though. My dark horse team, I try to pick teams that finish 5th or lower. Drexel barely qualifies, but they did go 10-8 last year in the CAA. They finished 5th. They went 17-15 overall. And again, we've talked about this a lot on Locked On College Basketball, and especially at the lower levels, I think continuity is so key in terms of being able to get off to a good start and be productive right away. And Drexel returns 11 of their 12 leading scorers. That's basically everybody. The only guy they lost is Coltrane Washington, who averaged 9.2 points per game last year. Everybody else is back. They have 86.3% of their minutes from last year's roster back in the fold. Again, continuity is key, and they have it here at Drexel. But you don't just want to bring back all your players from a team that wasn't very good. And again, this team was over 500 in regular season, over 500 in the non-conference, and they keep really talented players like Amari Williams, two-time Defensive Player of the Year. In the CAA, he's 6'10". He averaged over 2 blocks per game. He's a fantastic shot blocker, really, really good anchor for this team down on the block. They also had a player in Lucas Monroe from Penn. Monroe averaged 5.6 boards last year. He was kind of a key glue guy, do it all, 6'6" guard. And I think he's going to have a really valuable role for Drexel. And I think you got to shout out Coach Zach Spiker here. He's been there 8 years, and Drexel has either equaled or raised their win total every single year, excluding the COVID season. In the COVID season, they were going to qualify for the NCAA tournament. But excluding that year, Drexel has raised their win total or equaled it every single year. Zach Spiker continuing to make this team grow, and there's reason for optimism that this is going to be another big year for Drexel in the CAA. Wanted to tier out the conference here real quick before we get to our awards. Tier 1 is kind of the top 3 teams that we talked about: Charleston, UNC-Wilmington, and Hofstra. I think Hofstra, there's some concern they may drop a little bit, but I think you got to put them in Tier 1 after going 16-2 last year. Tier 2 is where we find Drexel as well as Towson and Delaware. Tier 3, we got 4 teams there. These were all the teams that were kind of around 500 last year: William and Mary, Stony Brook, and Northeastern. I also have added Campbell, who I think can be around a 500 team in this conference as soon as their first season. And then we rounded out with Tier 4, North Carolina A&T, Elon, Monmouth, and closing it out with Hampton. Closing out the show today with our award predictions. We got Player of the Year, Newcomer of the Year, Coach of the Year, and Defensive Player of the Year. We will start with Player of the Year, and I spoiled it for you a little bit earlier. That's Tyler Thomas from Hofstra, guy who averaged 16.5 points per game last year. He averaged about 4 boards. He shot about 41% from 3. Again, you average 16 points per game when you have a teammate who averaged 20, and now that teammate's gone. Pretty safe to expect that Thomas is going to take on a bigger load scoring the basketball this year. You've got to hope that his other teammates can help him out so that he doesn't get swarmed defensively. If that happens, he's a guy who could average 17, 18 points per game next year. Reasonable chance that that's enough for him to win Player of the Year, especially if Hofstra produces and is in the top 3 of the conference. I'll give an honorable mention here to Trezarian White from UNC-Wilmington, who I think has a real chance at this award as well. Newcomer of the Year, CJ Fulton from Charleston, from Lafayette, I should say. I talked about him a little bit earlier, the guy who averaged 10, 5, and 5, shot 38% from deep last year. I expect Charleston to be no worse than 3rd in the conference, probably 2nd, if not 1st. This year. And I think that starting point guard, transfer veteran guy who produced with legitimate numbers at Lafayette, if he puts up numbers similar to that, he's a guy who's going to get a lot of attention, not only as the newcomer of the year, but potentially as a first teamer in the CAA this season. Coach of the Year, I'm going with Zach Spiker at Drexel. I talked about him already. Guy has improved this team's record every single year since he has taken over as the head coach 8 years ago. 17 wins last year. If they keep producing, if they keep winning, could it be a 20-win season for Drexel? Is that enough for him to win Coach of the Year? It probably should be. If they finish top 4, they were 5th last year. So if they finish 4th, 3rd, maybe they finish 2nd. Heck, I don't think it's crazy to think they could win the league. But if they win 20 games and they finish top 3 in the league, I think he's the one who takes home the award, even over Pat Kelsey, even over Siddle, even over some of the other really good coaches. Speedy Claxton, who won this award last year. Like, there's some great coaches in the CAA. But I think Zach Spiker and the trajectory that they have been on at Drexel is going to be enough for them to take home this award this season. Closing out the show, Defensive Player of the Year. This is an easy one. Amari Williams. He won it 2 years in a row. He's back. He's probably going to win it again. At Drexel, starting center, over 2 blocks per game, one of the most productive shot blockers in the entire country last year. Hard to imagine he doesn't win it again. If he doesn't, it's probably because Shaquem Phillips at UNC-Wilmington is the guy who was one of the most productive in terms of getting steals last year for Wilmington. I could see him sneaking it if there's some voter fatigue on Amari Williams, but it's probably going to be one of those 2 guys. All right, that's going to do it for today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch every single day. Check us out on YouTube if you have not done so yet. We're hoping to get to 2,000 subscribers before the start of the season. You can help us out by going to YouTube, searching Locked On College Basketball, and hitting that big red subscribe button. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, as always, peace out.